In Generosity Sunday last week. Today is Christ the King Sunday, and my sermon is titled, "What Kind of King Do You Want?" Now today what I'd like to do is three things. I'd like to go back in time and look at what kings were like back in the first century when Jesus roamed the planet. Secondly, I'd like to point out why Jesus is different than those earthly kings. And thirdly, how does it all apply to us? What difference does it make for us on Christ the King Sunday? So let's get started. The first question is, what was it like back then? 2,000 years ago, what were kings like? Let's go back into the time machine and do a little exploring together. In the days of Jesus, kings were powerful, they were mighty, they were extremely wealthy, and they were ruthless in the way they ruled. It was their way or the highway, no question about it. Kings were powerful and mighty. But above all, people thought of kings as extremely wealthy, and I'll explain this one. Back in those days, the king was allowed to have as many wives as he wanted to have. The more wives he had, the wealthier he appeared to society. So that means a king who had 50 wives was probably richer and wealthier than the king who had 25 wives. Well, fasten your seatbelts, folks, because in 1 Kings 11, we learned that King Solomon had 700 wives. But that wasn't enough. In addition to 700 wives, he had 300 close female associates in the palace. So there are 1,000 women running around waiting on King Solomon. Now, when I first read this as a teenager, I thought, wow, 700 wives. Now I'm saying, 700 wives! But it's true, it's right in the Bible. He was mighty, he was powerful, he was extremely wealthy, and he flaunted his wealth. Now, the king of Persia put a nice spin on this whole thing. Not only should you have hundreds of wives, but the king of Persia said this: "None of my wives can come in and talk to me unless I invite them to come. And if a wife of mine comes in unannounced and uninvited, I will behead her. I will execute her." Wow. So if wife number 235 comes in and says, "Hey, we're having trouble with Jedediah," that's it. We're cutting your head off. That's it. The wife had to be invited to speak to the king. Plain and simple. No ifs, ands, or buts. The king was in charge. The king was extremely wealthy in these different places. In 2,000 years ago, there was a king, Rehoboam, by the way, who was the king of the southern Jewish kingdom. Now, he was a son of King Solomon. Solomon had the 700 wives and the 300 female friends. Rehoboam decided he's going to tax the people and tax them more and tax them more and tax them more. Now, where do you think the taxes went? Did it go toward roads and improvements? Did it go toward the community? No. The money went right into his bank account. King Rehoboam just kept getting wealthier and wealthier, and people were paying more taxes, more taxes, more taxes. Is it any wonder there was a civil war? And they rebelled against this very greedy king, taxing his people to death. So, to paint the picture for you, kings in the days of Jesus, they were greedy, they were selfish, they were powerful, they were narcissistic, they were extremely materialistic. So why, in God's name, do we call Jesus the King of all kings? That question came up because Pontius Pilate looked Jesus in the eye and he said, "So tell me, are you the king of the Jews?" And Pilate implied, "Are you like those other kings And of course, Jesus gives the perfect answer, as he always does. Jesus said, "My kingdom is not from this world." Jesus is the King of Kings because he is not greedy and selfish, and he is not narcissistic, and he is not power hungry, and he's not materialistic, and he doesn't lord his authority over others. And Jesus himself said these words. Look up on the monitor, will you? These are powerful words right from Jesus, according to Matthew. Jesus said, and I quote, "You know that the rulers of the Gentiles lord it over them. Not so with me. It will not be so among you. The Son of Man came not to be served, but to serve." The world had never seen a king like that ever before Jesus. Kings were used to being served, waited on, pampered. And what does Jesus say? "I'm the king who has come to serve and put others first." And then he practiced what he was preaching, didn't he? When he rolled up his sleeves one day and he washed the stinky, smelly feet of his friends. No king on this planet would ever bow down and wash feet. But Jesus said, "I am a different king. I am washing your feet. I am serving others. I am putting others' needs ahead of my own." No one ever saw that before Jesus. Jesus, the King of all kings, because he served others and put them first. And then he said one more thing. Please look on the monitor. He said, "I no longer call you servants. Instead, I call you friends." Before Jesus, when they thought of kings, they said, "We have to serve the king. We are working for the king." You know what Jesus said? "You're not working for me. You're working with me to change the world for the better." Jesus said, "Come work with me, and we will feed the hungry together. We will clothe the naked together. We will pronounce hope for the downtrodden. We will announce the reign of God's love and grace." Jesus said, "Work with me, not for me." Isn't that beautiful? Jesus, the King of Kings, is walking with you, not in front of you. He's walking with you. And he wants you to change the world with him. Every time you do an act of goodwill, you are working with King Jesus Christ. Every time you make your world better than it was before, you're working with the King of Kings, Jesus the Christ. I think that is absolutely wonderful. Years ago, there was a song written by Fernando Ortega. And Fernando Ortega was contemplating on this, saying, "What kind of king do I want in my world?" And he wrote these now famous words. Again, I draw your attention to the monitor. "In the morning when I rise, in the morning when I rise, in the morning when I rise, give me Jesus. You can have all the rest, but give me Jesus. And when I am alone, oh, and when I am alone, and when I am alone, give me Jesus. Give me Jesus. Give me Jesus. You can have all the rest, but give me Jesus." What kind of king do you want? That's the obvious question. Do you want a king who lords power over you? Do you want a king you're afraid of? Do you want a king who takes your wealth and makes it his own? Do you want a king who rules every aspect of your life? Or do you want a king who says, "I am here to serve you. I am here to lift you up when you're down. I am here to give you hope when you're losing hope. I am here to prepare a kingdom that is eternal in heaven someday for you. Now, what king do you want? The obvious answer is, give us Jesus. Each and every one of us can say, give me Jesus. That's the king I want. Give me Jesus, who sacrificed his own life to save our lives. Give me Jesus, who had every idea for making the world better than it is today, if we would only follow his direction and guidance. Give me Jesus today. Give me Jesus tomorrow. Give me Jesus forever and ever. To that I say, amen. And thanks be to King Jesus. May the grace of God, which surpasses all human understanding, keep our hearts and minds in King Jesus. Amen.